Hello and welcome to. I'm back, motherfuckers. I don't care, I can't get monetized. So, yep, you heard it. I'm correct. You're back. No, wait. That's correct. You heard it. I'm back. That's the right way to say that one. So, welcome back. To the people who are new here. Hello. Welcome. Please come in. You're free to leave whenever. For open door. So, have a without further ado, let me introduce myself here. I am ADHD_God. And yes, to the oldies, to the people who have been on my channel for a little bit, I'm gonna be reading Seen Not Heard by LitaCakes. So, and thank you for letting me read this, the author. And without further ado, trigger warnings are on the screen. God damn it. No, I don't care. Okay. Don't mind that. But all the stuff you need is on the screen right now. So now let us begin. Seen, not heard. Chapter 6. You do not need permission to exist. Arriving at home was a bit of a culture shock for Izuku. They had love They had a lovely standalone house. It looked like it had at least 3 bedrooms. It wasn't tiny and cramped. It wasn't a tiny and cramped apartment where Izuku would suffocate in on the isolation and residual anger that seemed to seep out of every piece of wood in that house. When Shouta opened the door and Yamada followed him in, Izuku realized he didn't even know their house rules yet. He should have asked in the car. Damn it! Of course, his useless brain would fail him at the most important. When it was most important, Izuku followed them, then, but Izuku followed them in, but stopped at the Gyeonken to take off his shoes, and that he sat them aside beside the door like always, then looked around and they had slipped if they had slippers, but no one had clean socks or gloves nearby. Shit! Izuku crouched down to rifle through his backpack to find some. Missing something, Izuku? Mike asked. No, I'm looking for clean gloves and socks, he explained, not even looking up as he signed, one-handed. Why? You stopped. Izuku stopped and stared at Mike, who had cocked his neck to the side with a very confused look on his face. I am allowed inside without clean gloves or clean socks and clean socks. Shouta had came back and silently asked Mike what was going on. Mike blinked for a few times, sometimes dark rising beneath his eyes. Izuku, why would we force you to wear gloves in the house? Shouta face twinted in disgust. What was the reason you couldn't? What reason could there be for something like that? Izuku's brain was breaking. Didn't they not know? Had they never been told that quirkless children were full of germs and weak and sickly? Did 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 he did his lung disorder? He knew his lung disorder was fake, but his parents told him since the day he was diagnosed that he was weak and sickly, full of germs. I'm quirkless. I don't want to get your house full of my germs. I could, I shouldn't have clung to Shouta like I did. I might get him sick of from all my crying. Inko never let me into the house without putting clean socks and gloves on. Both his guardians looked utterly horrified at what Izuku just said to them. Mike even pulled a hand over his mouth. A second later, Shouta was wrapping his whole body around Izuku and pulling him into a dep a desperately a des a desperately and a desperate and tight hug. Don't you ever say anything like that ever again. It's not true, Izuku. Quirkless people aren't any more filled with dreams than everyone else. You aren't gonna get me sick. You don't have to put clean socks on just because you walked in the house. You can touch everything you want with your bare hands, okay? Izuku was sure he'd probably cry if he hadn't already cried himself empty earlier this evening. So instead, he just clung to Shota sighed and nodded into the man's shoulder. He had so many things to ask, so many more more rules he needed to follow, but were those rules also wrong? He knew, of course, that a lot of what his parents said and did were wrong, but he never assumed that his quirkless problems were wrong. Everybody in society followed the beliefs that he was worthless, sick, and gross, and horrible. Everybody knew he was quirkless, at least. Why were these two men different? Or was everybody else wrong? Hey, little listener, what's on your mind? I can see the glare trembling in there. Talk to us. The gears I can see the gears trembling in there. Talk to us. Izuku wiped a stray tear from his face and shrugged. I wasn't sure what the rules are here. The rules? Shota asked, leaning back from the hug. Back in Inko's apartment, when I came home, I put my shoes by the door, put clean socks on and gloves, and then I got situated. Do I need to do that here? The two heroes exchanged a worried look at Mike. The two heroes exchanged a worried look, and Mike asked, What does situated mean, Izuku? He huffed a sign and shrugged yet again. I'm quirkless. Quirkless kids are supposed to be here to be seen and not heard. When I came home, Inko put a muzzle on me, and I would get into my room and change, and immediately put my dirty clothes in the bin before washing washing, so I wouldn't get my germs everywhere. Mike visibly winced and rubbed a hand across his cheek. It was a soothing sort of rub that Izuku was all too familiar with. Shota had a very dark look in his eyes that might make Izuku scared if he didn't know it wasn't directed at him. It pointed it was pointed at the door right now. No, Izuku, Shota finally said, his deep voice was wrathful. You will never be made to wear a fucking torture device ever again. You can also stay in whatever clothing makes you comfortable whenever, okay? Izuku nodded. He didn't It didn't really make sense to him. whenever everybody in his life seemed to agree with Ingo. Everything was going so fast as to remind him about his disability on a daily basis. Everything going so far as to remind him about his disability on a daily basis. As Shouta got up, he held out a hand for Izuku to take, and then the teen didn't hesitate to take it, even if he was still in shock from all the changes. He did, however, hesitate to step into the house with dirty socks on and just a pair of thin slippers at his bare hands. Even in his own small apartment, he did spend the last 3 months. He wore gloves sometimes, but not all the time. After all, he was the only one who lived there. But the habit was hard to shake. The kitchen was right next to the living room. To the left, your bedroom is upstairs across from ours. You will have the guest bedroom to yourself since we have our own. Our office is down here, and the third bedroom has turned into a house gym, which you are welcome to use once we go over safety. I have been using gym equipment since I was a kid. I took free community classes in the local gym, self-defense, parkour, and martial arts, weightlifting. So you're good on your feet on those rooftops. Shoto muzzled with a grin. Izuku blushed a little nod. All right. Anyways, this is your room. Shota had led him upstairs as they opened the door to a simple guest room that was painted a soft gray and navy blue sheets, with navy blue sheets on the bed. There was a desk, a TV, and a few shelves. It was more than Izuku had ever been given. Izuku finally let go of Shota's hand and explored the room. The first thing he checked out was if he could fit underneath the bed. He hadn't needed to hide in his apartment since he was alone, but now he could hide again. What are you doing, little listener? Mike, what are you doing, little listener? Mike asked in the doorway beside Shota. Making sure I can fit. It makes hiding easier. The men exchanged a look, and Shota sighed. He seemed to realize something that Izuku wasn't going to be told about. Izuku, you won't need to hide unless you really feel you need to. But but we will never give you a reason to hide. If you feel like hiding, please tell us so we can help. If you feel like hiding, it might mean we've upset you, and we don't want that. And we don't want to do that, okay? Tells Mike hadn't done much of the speaking since they got to the topic of house rules, but he's been rather emotionally off and on. But Izuku could tell he was really serious about this one. Izuku scooted out from under the bed and nodded. He could try to remember that. Now that he was in his room, he assumed they'd leave him and he'd be left to unpack his things and remain quiet for everything. Oh, he forgot his things at the door. Izuku turned to ask, only to find both of his guardians were placing bags down for him. Izuku smiled behind his mask and signed, "Thank you," softly. Mike dipped his head and wandered back downstairs. Shota leaned on the doorway and sighed that it seemed like a serious concern, but he didn't speak. Instead, he chose to sign. Izuku wondered what sparked that. Maybe just practice? What other rules did Inko have for the house? He asked. Izuku frowned, uh, but explained, since all seemed so normal to him. He didn't really get bothered by somebody asking. I had to stay in my room. I got home. I ate after. I had to stay in my room once I got home. After I ate dinner, if I got any, until the morning if I needed something. I stood in my driveway and knocked. If I needed somebody, I stood at my doorway and knocked and waited for her to come. In the morning, she put breakfast on the table and sometimes a first aid kit if I needed it. If I was late to school and got anything below a C, I would be punished. I told her that classes I took were all extra study for school, not gym classes. Truthfully, the school bores me. Tip, truthfully, school bores me. It's so easy. If I get straight A's, the teachers say I treat and then fail me. If I behave, if I behave and stay quiet, she leaves me alone. She wasn't hurtful. She just wanted, she didn't want to touch me, to touch, she just didn't want me to touch anything. I was if only I was only allowed to speak if asked to reply directly. Shota frowned, lifting his hands to reply. So, your biological father was your main abuser? Inko just neglected you? Did you realize that? Do you realize that's not any better, right? I guess he injured me. She kicked him out. Things were much better. She stopped using the muzzle because of the scar, and she didn't want to risk medical bills for the infection since it basically muted me. She never brought it back out. Does she know you left? Shota asked this out loud. Izuku shrugged. I didn't leave a note, but I don't think she'll try to find me. Honestly, if you look up my address, you might it find an empty apartment now. She hated living there. With me gone, she finally, or maybe she hasn't noticed yet. I don't know. She's probably happier now. Izuku watched Shota wince. After a moment, he stepped out from the room and crouched down in front of Izuku. Listen to me, Izuku. I want to get something very clear with you. You, just you, as a person, no matter what your quirk status, your health status, your hair color, your gender, or you, whatever you could use to define you as a person, you are perfect. You are worthy enough. You are anyone in this world would be lucky to have you as their son. If Inko and that man you did to you was wrong. Whatever they told you, whatever they made you believe, Mike and I will spend the rest of our lives breaking it down and proving them wrong, okay? Izuku's tear ducts must have recovered because he couldn't hold back the wave of tears that crashed into him. His whole body his whole body cobbled with Shota and clung onto him. Clung to Shota and to hang on to him. Shota rocked them onto the floor with Izuku's new bedroom for what feels like hours, holding him. Izuku barely remembered what it felt like actually to be comforted. Certainly not since his diagnosis. Shouta had been the first up on the roof and given him any had to give him any kind of assurance outside of May kind words. He clearly was the first adult to do so. After a while, a voice called from downstairs. Mike's voice. "Dinner's ready, you two. Come and get it. I made stir fry." Izuku wiped his sleeve across his face, and Shota chuckled as he reached for a tissue beside the bedside table to hand to Izuku. I've a feeling there's going to be a lot of shocking changes. Just tell me when you're comfortable, and we'll explain. Okay? Izuku nodded. Shota stood up and with a groan and stretched out his spine, which made Izuku giggle a little, and Shota just snorted at it and ignored an shot him ignored annoyed glare and wandered out of the room. Izuku followed. Once they were downstairs, he discovered his newest problem. During dinner, was congregated in the kitchen. A sad panic, but he reminded himself that Shota to ask when he was comfortable. But he reminded himself that Shota said to ask when he was confused. But Shota couldn't get too far into the room. Izuku grabbed the back of his shirt and tugged lightly for attention. He paused and saw panic in Izuku's eyes. "What's wrong? Am I allowed in the kitchen? Where do I eat? Where do I put my dishes? Am I allowed at the table?" Shota frowned and took Izuku's hand. Mike was looking at both of them with curious eyes while holding a large set of cooking chopsticks. "You're allowed in any room of this house, Izuku. The only room with exceptions is our bedroom, but we only ask you to knock before entering. You eat with us at the table," Mike interjected them. "Or, if you're having movie nights, we can all eat in the living room," Shota shouted. What Mike said. "Yeah, as for dishes, we usually share cleaning dishes duties. So when you're done, I'll just wash them up and put them on the rack, okay?" He nodded as he followed Shota to the table and waited for the tired hero to point with one of the extra chairs, and hopefully wasn't Mike's or Shota's usuals. Izuku stood fat. Izuku still felt like he was taking up extra space he didn't have the right to be taking up in their lives. Every time his brain tried to tell him that he was wrong or bad, Mike or Shota would quickly fill him with more confidence that he wasn't, and it hopefully wouldn't sink in that he didn't have the right to take up somebody's space in somebody's life, and they are willing to accept that. Izuku was sitting on the couch in the next morning reading a book with Mike and with Mike quietly grading papers in the chair near where Shota walked into the living room. "Izuku," when the teen looked up with a tiny head tilt, "I had a chat with Nezu. He wants to meet you this weekend." Shota glanced up over Mike, and Izuku was pretty sure that they both were getting worried lines on their foreheads already. "The second thing I wanted to speak to you about is school." Izuku watched him sit down carefully across the coffee table. "The reason we didn't send you to school today was Firstly, because you need time to get settled here, but secondly, we need to know if it wasn't just your home life. Were people hurting you? Weren't just the people at home were hurting you? To be honest, Izuku hadn't thought about it. The bullying he that was happening at school was so minor to complain what he faced at home that he just assumed it was normal for kids to get bullied, even if he was the only one getting bullied in his whole class. Izuku looked down at himself, seeing though his own clothes at his own scars that lie beneath. They were scars that from when he was very young, not many, were from bullies. Katsuki left one on his arm, like a star burn. After Izuku's quote-unquote, lung disorder diagnosis, Katsuki had protected Izuku from physical bullying, but not verbal bullying. He still breathed Izuku and baited Izuku and threatened him. Even recently, he told him to jump off a roof. Despite that, Izuku didn't want to get Katsuki in trouble. He didn't understand the boy's actions or words, but it didn't mean he wanted to get them in trouble. Do I have to tell you their names? Or in all, it was everybody. I don't really want to talk about it, okay? I can go back to school until the end of the year. It's almost over anyway. Izuku? Mike gave him a soft look. If people were hurting you at school, we needed to report this to the school district, especially if the person was a teacher. Can you tell us a little bit of what happened at school so we can figure out how to report this? Izuku sighed and set his book down after marking his place. The teachers at school ignored me, only speaking to me in hand gestures or grunts. The students were mostly verbal. After Inko faked my illness, Kachan protected me from the physical violence, but he was still a verbal abuser like the rest of them. Just, hateful words, spider lilies on the desk. Part of why I blew up at Eraser, because yesterday Kaya-chan told me to jump off a roof and pray for a quirk in my next life. I was emotional, and I snapped. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. You were justified. Those were justifiable emotions. Shouta scoffed. He leaned forward, rubbing his face with his hands. He looked more exhausted than usual. Izuku wasn't sure if that was his fault or not. Finally, after a deep sigh, Shota shook his head. You're not going back to that school. I will burn it down myself if I have to. Izuku blinked. His head was ticking to side in confusion. It seemed every time these two heroes spoke, it confused the poor boy. He wasn't sure how he was going. His whole life never had found a single person who spoke like these two men did. He didn't believe he was a normal kid. Who believed he was a normal kid? Okay. Okay, Izuku replied dumbly, having a little idea of what else to say. Not having a little idea of what else to say. Seeming seemed to end the conversation, though Shota nodded once and left the room while heading towards his office. Mike went back to grading papers after a quick smile, so Izuku assumed that was that and went back to reading. Sunday morning found Izuku working on his laptop while Mike and Shota were making breakfast together. He had a few cases he wanted to wrap up and submitted to Shouta before weekend came to a close. They were meeting with Nezu before lunch, and Izuku was using his analyzation as a way to calm his nerves before having to meet the illustrious principal of UA High. Izuku hadn't been up since 5 in the morning working on his laptop when Mike had wandered into the living room about around 6 and found him engrossed. He did little more than stare at Izuku for a moment and head into the kitchen. Not long after that, Izuku smelled coffee and Shota wandered downstairs about around 6:30 and squinted his eyes at Izuku, but smelt coffee and must have been too that and but the coffee he smelt must have been too alluring because he went off to the kitchen in short in a short order. By the time Mike peeked his head around the kitchen doorway, Izuku was packing up the 2 cases he just finished, sending them off to Shoto. Hey, little listener, breakfast is ready. I hope you like waffles. Coming, Mike. He signed over his laptop. Once he hit send, the device was closed and set aside with his bag. He lazily wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his tired eyes. The computer screen always gave him a headache if he stared at them for too long. Maybe he shouldn't. Maybe he should get checked by an eye doctor. Maybe he needs glasses. Maybe a weak, quirkless kid and all. It would make sense his eyesight wasn't the best. What you working on, kid? What you working on, kid? Shota asked in a sleepy voice. Just stuff. Izuku slurred. The whole room stopped. Izuku let a hand fall from his face, his eyes wide with the sound of his own voice. It was raspy and quiet. It sounded horrible, but it was his voice. Shota and Mike were sharing a look that Izuku translated into a faint sense of smugness. Okay, sit down. Have some breakfast. Izuku nodded and slipped into the chair across from Shota. Feeling entirely unsure of what the hell just happened. He didn't even try to speak in years, not since Hasashi had burned him. But but some part of his brain told him maybe that it wasn't it was because he couldn't, because he was too scared. No one commented about his speaking during breakfast. Neither guardian asked Izuku why he suddenly vocalized or why he hadn't before. Guaranteed, Shota knew the interview at the police station that it would likely need a speech therapy to help his wounded throat. Izuku had been honest with them that whole time. He knew it wouldn't be easy to readjust his vocal cords to speaking. When they just finished eating, they all washed up and helped Mike put away the plates after they were dry. It was calming to share duties and chores. It felt like something a family did, something Izuku was unfamiliar with. Izuku? Shota asked as he wiped his hands on a towel to dry them off. Izuku looked down from the cabinet that he was stocking with freshly dried plates. If you wanted to relearn speech, we can set you up with a therapist. If not, it's okay too. Whatever makes you most comfortable. Easy to produced a faint smile beneath his mask as he shut the cabinet door and placed his hands clumsily on the computer, and genuinely thought it over. That was true. It would likely help him in the future to have a voice. Not everybody spoke sign language after all. In fact, it was pretty uncommon in their region. Izuku had looked up the statistics once when he had been teaching himself, so having a voice would be an asset. But did he feel ready for that yet? Was he really ready to put himself out of his shell and start learning what this new world is full of accepting people might do for him? He muttered. He followed down and then signed, "Yes, therapy." Mike beamed across the kitchen, and Shouta gave a simple nod. Easy could tell the man was proud, though. His eyes were so easy to read, but Izuku's mind. After years of trying to read his parents' moods through their eyes, their words, their footsteps, and how they carried themselves, reading these two heroes was trivial. In the insight it gave him was warming. They were so honest and kind. They truly wanted the best for Izuku. So he was swaying along for the ride in the roller coaster of newfound compassion in his lifetime. And hello, welcome, and have a good day.